My name is Ava Mitchell. I am 32 years old. When my father called and said he needed $8,000 for emergency medical bills, I did not ask a single question. I ate cereal mixed with tap water for 3 weeks, worked every available shift at the restaurant until my hands cracked and my feet ached through the soles of my shoes. And I had the money wired to him before the month was out, the way I had always done it, the way I had always been for this family. The quiet solution that arrived without ceremony and left without thanks. And then 2 weeks later, on my lunch break, I saw the photographs Robert Mitchell had posted himself on Facebook, completely publicly, without a trace of concern for who might see them. A cold beer in his hand, mirrored sunglasses, standing on a golf course in Scottsdale, Arizona, grinning wide in a group of 4 men with the full ease of a man who is exactly where he wants to be, caption reading, "Best trip of the year." It was not a medical emergency. It was a 5-day golf trip. And the part that tells you everything you need to know about the 8 years that followed is this: I did not stop sending money after I found out. I kept going, every single month. $2,500 for 8 years. $247,500 total. And on my wedding day, my parents were not there. Not because of illness, not because of emergency. They were at a birthday party for a birthday that was not even on the actual birthday. Before I go any further, take a second and hit that like button, and subscribe right now because this story gets so much heavier before it gets lighter, and I promise it is worth staying for every single minute of it. Now let me take you back to where all of this began. To understand why a 47-second phone call was enough to end 8 years of sacrifice and $250,000, you need to understand what those years actually looked like from the very beginning. Because none of it arrived suddenly or without warning. It was built, layer by layer, across an entire childhood, in a 3-bedroom colonial near Tryon Creek in southwest Portland, where love was distributed not by need, but by preference. And the preference had been established long before I was old enough to name it. My mother, Diane Mitchell, was a woman who cared deeply about appearances. What the neighbors thought, what other parents said, what image the family projected at church on Sunday mornings. And my father, Robert Mitchell, worked in logistics, came home exhausted, and had organized his entire adult life around one consistent strategy: not choosing, not intervening, not spending himself on anything that required him to take a side when Diane had already taken one. Which meant that every time a situation arose where someone needed to say, "This is wrong," or "This child deserves better," Robert sat quietly and let Diane manage it, because that was the arrangement, and neither of them had shown any interest in renegotiating it. And then there were the 2 daughters. My sister Kayla was 3 years younger than me, and from as far back as I can clearly remember, she occupied a visibly different category in our household. Not simply the younger child, but something more deliberate than that, something curated, as though Diane had made an early and irreversible decision about which daughter would represent the family's best image and had organized everything accordingly, including the way she introduced us at family gatherings, which I first noticed at 7 and fully understood by 10. She would set her hand on Kayla's shoulder and say with unmistakable warmth, "This is my daughter Kayla," and then glance in my direction almost as an afterthought and add, "And this is Ava, Kayla's older sister." Not her daughter, not her firstborn, just the older sister. As though the only fact about me worth communicating was how I related to the girl beside me. Kayla got the bedroom overlooking the backyard garden. I got the small room next to the garage, where I fell asleep most nights to the groaning of the water heater through the wall. Diane bought Kayla new clothes every season, the right brands, the shoes her friends were wearing, and I wore hand-me-downs from cousins 2 sizes larger and learned to stretch a dollar in ways that leave marks. Not because we were poor, but because resources in our house were distributed by preference rather than need. And the preference had been established long before I understood that I was allowed to question it. By 14, I was working weekend shifts at a bakery 2 miles from home, up before dawn, paying for my own school supplies and field trips and everything in between, with the whole arrangement framed as character building, as though Kayla's character had already reached completion, and mine still required the specific discipline of being left entirely to itself. When I was 16, I saved for 6 months and bought a used Ford Focus with a dented front bumper and air conditioning that worked only when it felt like cooperating. And I washed that car every Sunday morning, even in November, with fingers going numb, because it was the first thing in my entire life that belonged to me and had cost no one else a single dollar. 2 years later, when Kayla graduated high school with a 2.8 GPA, my parents surprised her with a brand new cherry red Chevy Malibu, leather interior, sunroof, the whole package. And my mother's entire explanation was 3 words: she deserves it. I had graduated with a 3.7 while working 20 hours a week, and I stood in the driveway looking at that car and understood with a clarity that settled into my bones and never entirely left what the terms of this arrangement actually were. I did not hate Kayla. I just hated that love in my family came with a price tag, and I was always the one being asked to pay it. The real bleeding started when I was 24, fresh from my culinary arts certificate at Portland Community College, every credit paid for between double shifts at Canopy Restaurant in the Pearl District, where I was building the kind of kitchen stamina you can only earn by actually surviving the heat. And I was beginning to understand, for the first time in my adult life, what financial independence felt like. A steady paycheck, a savings account I had finally stopped raiding. Then Diane called with the voice she reserved for outcomes already decided, tight, controlled, leaving no space for redirection, and told me Robert had lost his job, the mortgage was due, and they needed $3,000. I did not have $3,000 in cash, but I had a credit card with a $5,000 limit I had been protecting carefully for a genuine emergency. And I told myself if my parents might lose their home, that qualified. So I maxed the card and wired the money the same afternoon. And Diane's response when she confirmed it arrived was a single sentence delivered with the warmth of a routine business confirmation. We knew we could count on you. For the next 3 months, I ate ramen twice a day and worked every available shift, paying that card down penny by penny, while my parents posted Sunday brunch photos across town, and Kayla uploaded a spa day selfie captioned, "Mommy-daughter bonding." I told myself it was a one-time crisis, told myself this was what families did, told myself the money was an investment in people who would return the care in some other form, in some other season. But what I could not yet see was that this first emergency had never been a crisis at all. It was an audition, and I had passed so completely and convincingly that they never stopped casting me. 4 years later, at a company Christmas party I had nearly skipped because I was exhausted from the night before, I met Liam Carter, And from the very first conversation, something in me relaxed in a way I did not yet have a name for. He was a software engineer, quiet and genuinely thoughtful. The kind of man who listened when you talked instead of waiting for his turn, who drove a Honda Civic without apology and wore the same navy blazer to every semi-formal event with the easy indifference of someone who had long since stopped performing for an audience he had never asked for. I was 28 at the time, working as a sous chef at Luce Restaurant on Northwest Glisson. I had clawed my way up from prep cook through sheer stubbornness and was developing a reputation as the cook who stayed completely calm when everything around her was simultaneously falling apart. And I was still sending $2,500 home every single month, automatic and unexamined, scheduled on the first like rent I had never once considered canceling. 3 months into dating, on a quiet evening when Liam was helping me build a budget at his kitchen table, he stopped scrolling through the numbers and looked up with the specific gravity of someone who has encountered a truth they were not prepared for. Ava, every month, same amount. That is more than most people pay in rent. Nobody had ever noticed. Not once. Not in 4 years of transfers. Because if I don't, I'm a bad daughter, I said, and the words came out before I could think. Old words, automatic, worn smooth from years of repetition, the verbal equivalent of a groove so deep you no longer notice you are traveling in it. That night, we built a spreadsheet together. Dates, amounts, notes. Emergency car repair, Kayla's textbooks, mortgage help that came in waves, the supposed medical bills, the $3,000 beginning, and the numbers climbed higher than I had been allowing myself to see. And when we reached the total at the bottom of the page, Liam covered my hand with his and said, "You're not a bad daughter. Love isn't supposed to be a loan you can never pay off." That spreadsheet would become the most important document of my life. I had wanted to open my own place since I was 16, and the dream had its roots in my grandmother, Grandma Rose, who lived in a small cottage in Milwaukee with a kitchen that smelled permanently of cast iron and warm herbs and something rich simmering low on the back burner. A kitchen that felt like the only place in my childhood where I was simply allowed to exist without performing anything for anyone. She taught me to make her cast iron skillet cornbread and her rosemary herb frittata, and she told me with flour dusting her silver hair, "You have a gift, Ava. These hands were made to build something warm in a world that runs cold." She died when I was 19 and left me her recipe box and the locket she had worn since her own wedding. And the dream stayed long after she was gone, kept alive the way the most important things survive, quietly, underneath everything else, waiting. By 29, I was taking custom weekend catering orders and putting every dollar into a savings account I had quietly labeled Future. And when I told Diane about the plan to open a brunch cafe, she laughed with the sharp, dismissive quality of a door closing too hard, said small businesses failed in the first year, said I should be realistic, and Kayla called the whole thing cute without looking up from her phone. And that Christmas, they gave Kayla premium golf clubs for networking and gave me a $40 gift card to a big box store. The message required no translation. My dreams were not worth investing in. My value to this family was entirely transactional, and the transaction had always only ever moved in one direction. The first time I met James and Susan Carter, I did not know that families could operate the way theirs did. Liam drove me to their house in Lake Oswego on a Sunday afternoon in early spring, a modest colonial with climbing roses along the front walkway, warm and genuinely lived in. And Susan opened the door before we knocked and pulled me into a hug like we had already known each other for years, completely and immediately warm, the way a kitchen smells when someone has been cooking since morning. James shook my hand, and at dinner, while passing the bread basket, asked with genuine, unhurried curiosity, "So, what do you love to make?" Nobody had ever asked me that. Not once. My own parents had never asked about my work or my passion or what made me feel alive in a kitchen. "I want to open a brunch cafe someday," I said. And James mentioned he worked in commercial real estate, and when I was ready to look at spaces, he might be able to help with lease negotiations. On the drive home, I cried. When Liam asked what was wrong, I told him nothing was wrong, and then I told him the truth. I just didn't know it could feel like this, like being wanted without having to pay for it. I want to pause here for a second. If you have ever sat at someone else's family table and felt more seen than you have ever felt in your own home, drop a comment below because you are not alone. And if this story is hitting close, a like means more than you know. Now let me get back to what happened when my sister got engaged. Then Kayla got engaged, and everything escalated in the way things escalate when the people doing the escalating have never once encountered a limit. She had met Brandon Reed at a rooftop bar downtown, a stockbroker with slicked back hair and a Rolex he found a way to mention within the first 10 minutes of any conversation. The specific kind of man who treats every room like an audition. And within 6 months, they were engaged. And within 7, Diane was on the phone with a number. $15,000, my share of the wedding fund, delivered as fact rather than request, in the flat and final voice she used for outcomes already decided. I told her I was saving for my own future. She told me Kayla was getting married now. I said I was trying to open a cafe. She said I could open a cafe anytime, but Kayla only got married once. And then came the crying. Not gentle private tears, but the loud, weaponized sobs that Diane deployed with full awareness of their effect, refined over decades into an instrument of precise and reliable pressure. And she said Brandon's family was wealthy and they needed to make an impression, and it was what families did. In the end, I sent $10,000. It wiped out my entire future account. Every dollar I had saved, gone in a single wire transfer. Kayla's wedding was held at the Sentinel Hotel Ballroom in downtown Portland. Vera Wang gown, ice sculpture in the foyer, a live jazz trio. And I stood in the wedding party wearing a blush bridesmaid dress Diane had selected because, as she put it would not draw attention away from the bride. And at the reception, I was standing near the bar when I heard Diane telling Brandon's parents, in her most gracious projected voice, "We are so proud of both our girls, but Kayla has always been the special one." I smiled and kept refilling my champagne. Nobody thanked me for the $10,000. Not at the ceremony, not at the reception, not once in the weeks that followed. Liam proposed on a rainy April evening in Milwaukee, in the herb garden beside Grandma Rose's old cottage. The cottage had been sold years before, but the new owners had kept her garden, and the rosemary and lavender and thyme were still growing wild in the same beds, still smelling exactly as I remembered from childhood. and Liam had gotten their permission weeks ahead of time because he thought about everything the way he thought about everything. Carefully, completely, with real attention to what mattered. He knelt in the damp earth with the sapphire from Grandma Rose's locket reset into a new setting, her history carried forward into our future. And I said yes before he finished the question. That night, floating on happiness, I called Diane to share the news, and her response was a flat, assessing question about his family's background, followed by and one reluctant acknowledgement. Well, at least he has a stable job. No congratulations, no warmth. Kayla texted that getting engaged before the 2-year mark was, in her opinion, kind of tacky. And I sat in the kitchen reading that text for a long time, trying to understand what kind of family responded to their daughter's engagement with an inventory instead of a celebration. And then Liam found me, pulled me close, and said quietly, "Then we celebrate with the people who actually care." 6 months before the wedding, I signed the lease on a small storefront on Southeast Division Street. The name came to me in a dream, Ember & Co. Brunch Café, a name that felt like Grandma Rose's kitchen at first light, all low fire and warm cast iron and the smell of something good coming alive slowly on the stove. The specific feeling of a place built for people who need somewhere to land. James had found the space during a routine property walkthrough and called me that Thursday evening, slid the lease terms across his dining room table with the matter-of-fact generosity that was simply how he operated. Quietly, without fanfare, solving problems before they fully became problems. Susan brought a vintage cast-iron skillet from an estate sale the following week, pressed it into my hands and said, "For good luck." And I recognized by its weight and seasoned surface that it was exactly the kind Grandma Rose had used, and I kept it behind the counter from the very first day and never cooked a single frittata without it. I was still sending $2,500 home every month, even as I scraped together deposits and equipment costs and first-month rent, stretched so thin I could feel myself fraying. But I refused to stop the transfers, because family was family, even when family did not feel like family. Then, 2 months before the wedding, came the phone call that broke something I had not known was still fragile. Robert called and told me he had been experiencing chest pain. A cardiologist had ordered a stress test and imaging. Specialist fees and the imaging center costs were coming to approximately $8,000 that insurance would not cover. And his voice carried the specific tremor of a man delivering genuinely frightening news. And I believed him completely. Because what kind of daughter assumes her father is lying about his heart? I ate cereal with water instead of milk for 3 weeks, and I want you to hold that image for a moment, because it is the image that tells you everything about what I was willing to do for people who had never done the same for me. I ate cereal with water, skipped dinners, worked every available shift, and had $8,000 wired to my parents before the month was out. 2 weeks later, I was on my lunch break scrolling Facebook when I saw the photographs Robert had posted himself, publicly, apparently with no concern for who might see them. Standing on a golf course in Scottsdale, Arizona, cold beer in hand, sunglasses catching the desert sun, grinning wide among 4 friends, caption reading, "Best trip of the year, nothing like 90 degrees and 18 holes with the crew." I sat in my car in the parking lot of the cafe and read that caption 3 times, and I looked at his face, relaxed, tanned, the face of a man who has not spent 3 weeks eating cereal with water. And I felt something go quiet inside me that had been making noise for a very long time. Rachel Hayes, my mother's younger sister, frozen out years earlier for simply refusing to give my parents money, confirmed it that evening without softening a single syllable. The hospital story had been entirely fabricated. There was no cardiologist, no imaging center, and she had overheard Robert planning the trip 3 weeks before he ever called me. That night, Liam opened the spreadsheet and added one line, quietly and without comment. $8,000. Golf trip, Scottsdale, Arizona. The number sat in the cell, and we looked at it together and did not speak for a long moment. 2 months before the wedding, I delivered my parents' invitation in person. Simple cream cardstock, pressed lavender from Susan's garden, June 15th, written with care. Diane glanced at it and frowned immediately, said the date was close to Kayla's birthday on the 17th, and she might already have plans and would need to check. And Kayla wandered in and said Brandon wanted to go to Cabo that weekend, and she would try to make it but was not making promises. And Robert sat in the living room watching golf on television and did not turn around. On the drive home, I called Liam, my voice hollow, and told him they had not committed, that they might have plans for my wedding. And he said gently, "Ava, maybe it's time to accept that your family isn't capable of being what you need them to be." "They'll come," I said. "When the actual day arrives, they'll be there." I could not imagine the alternative. 6 weeks later, I learned that cruelty was exactly what they were capable of. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in late May. I was standing inside the bridal boutique on Northwest 23rd Avenue, surrounded by mirrors, wearing the gown I had pictured since I was a girl. Ivory silk, delicate beading at the neckline. The consultant had just finished the final adjustments and the hem was perfect. And I was still looking at my reflection with something close to wonder when my phone buzzed on the bench beside me and Diane's name appeared on the screen. She did not ask how the fitting was going. She simply began speaking in a voice as flat and final as a door swinging shut, and told me she and Robert would not be at the wedding, that June 15th was Kayla's birthday weekend, that Brandon was throwing an early celebration on the 15th, and they could not miss their daughter's birthday. The fitting room went completely silent. The consultant looked up from the hem, pin still between her fingers. I stared at my reflection. A woman in a wedding dress, a phone pressed to her ear, watching the world collapse in slow motion, and said the 2 words I had been trained across 32 years to say in moments of pain, the words that had functioned my entire life as a white flag and a closing door simultaneously. I understand. Goodbye, Mom. I set the phone down. I checked the call duration afterward. 47 seconds. That is how long it took to dismantle 32 years of desperate hoping. 47 seconds and a birthday party that was not even on the actual birthday. I finished the fitting, paid the balance, walked out into the sunshine and drove home in a silence that felt like a different kind of sound. Liam was home when I arrived. He took one look at my face and crossed the room without speaking, and I told him every syllable of those 47 seconds in the exact order they had been delivered. And he did not rage, simply held me and asked, when I had finished, what I wanted to do. "I know exactly what I want to do," I said. That night, after dinner, I sat at the kitchen table with my banking app open, the recurring transfer glowing on the screen. $2,500, first of every month, 8 years without interruption, as reliable as a calendar and twice as impersonal. Liam stood in the doorway and said I did not have to decide tonight. "Yes, I do," I told him. "If I wait until morning, I'll talk myself out of it. I'll tell myself I'm overreacting." "You're not overreacting," he said. I pressed cancel, then confirm, and the screen refreshed and the transfer disappeared. $247,500, released not as punishment, but as a number finally freed from the shame of what it had never managed to buy me. I did not send a text. I did not call to explain. I simply stopped giving and waited to see what would happen when I did. If you have ever canceled something you should have canceled years earlier and felt that specific combination of terror and relief arrive at exactly the same moment, drop a comment below and tell me about it. Now back to June 15th, because what happened on my wedding day is something I will carry for the rest of my life. On June 15th, I married the love of my life in the backyard of James and Susan Carter's home in Lake Oswego, under a canopy of string lights and white roses, with clear skies and a gentle breeze, and the kind of late spring Portland afternoon that feels specifically designed for beginning something that matters. 87 guests came. Liam's colleagues sat next to my coworkers from Luce, and the early regulars from Ember & Co., open 3 months by then, filled the remaining rows. From my side of the family, one person attended. Rachel Hayes drove 4 hours from Bend, arrived early, helped arrange the flowers, and held both my hands steady when I started shaking before the processional, looking at me with the eyes of someone who has known you your entire life and decided to show up anyway. "I wouldn't have missed this for the world," she said. "Grandma Rose would have been so proud of you." Susan helped me into the dress without trying to replace anyone or claim any role that was not hers. She simply stepped into the space that existed and filled it with grace, adjusting my veil and catching the tears that kept threatening to fall, and whispering that I was not losing anything today, that I was gaining everything I deserved. James had offered to walk me down the aisle the day before, quietly and without pressure attached to the offer. "Only if you want. No obligation." When I took his arm and felt the steadiness of his presence beside me at the end of that aisle, I knew I had chosen correctly in every direction that mattered. I had baked my own wedding cake, lemon lavender, built on Grandma Rose's recipe, decorated with fresh herbs from the garden where Liam had proposed. Unconventional and specific and entirely mine, assembled by people who had actually wanted to be there, which was the only way I wanted anything built from that point forward. That evening, dancing under the string lights, I felt a peace I had not felt in years. Not the absence of grief exactly, because the ache of my parents' absence was present and quiet. The ache of something accepted, rather than something that had the power to surprise me anymore. But peace nonetheless, the specific kind that arrives when you are finally in the right place with the right people, and you can feel it in your whole body. 3 weeks after the wedding, I was at the café finishing a custom anniversary cake when Diane's name appeared on my phone. She said there must be a mistake with the bank. The transfer had not come through. "There is no mistake," I said. A silence, and then, "You can't just stop. We depend on that money." "I know you do. I've been paying your bills for 8 years. "Exactly, so you understand how—" "I understand that you chose Kayla's birthday party over my wedding. I understand that after $247,000, I couldn't get you to show up for one afternoon." The silence darkened. "So this is revenge?" "No, Mom. This is me finally taking care of my own family." She told me I would regret it, that family was forever, that when I needed them, they would not be there. And I said goodbye and hung up and returned to my frosting with hands that were shaking slightly and a heart that was, for the first time in years, completely steady. The guilt campaign arrived within 48 hours. Robert called, the first time he had voluntarily dialed my number in years, to report that Diane had not slept or eaten, his voice carrying the low desperation of a man who had spent his life avoiding discomfort and was now being asked to absorb it without his usual buffer. Kayla's texts arrived rapid fire, cycling through cruel and selfish with the momentum of someone who has never once been asked to sit with consequences. And I did not respond to any of them. Rachel called one evening while I was closing the café and said, "Do you know what your mother did to Grandma Rose?" Exact same thing. She bled her dry until there was nothing left, and then blamed her for not having more to give. I stood in the empty cafe and looked at Grandma Rose's cast iron skillet on the shelf behind the counter and understood, with the specific weight of a thing that has always been half known being finally said aloud, that the pattern had been right in front of me my entire life. That I was the first person in 2 generations with enough distance from it to step outside of it. The doubts came anyway, regularly and without invitation, usually at 3 in the morning. I would wake with my heart pounding and the same questions cycling through the dark. Am I a bad daughter? Am I as selfish as they say? And one night, I slipped out of bed and sat on the kitchen floor with my thumb hovering over Diane's contact. Because one apology, one capitulation, and everything could go back to normal. But what was normal? Normal was giving until nothing remained. Normal was being invisible except when I was needed. Normal was a one-way door that only opened when money moved through it. And what I had done was not destroy the door. I had simply refused, at last, to pass through it. That Sunday, after a dinner I barely touched, Susan caught my hand in the kitchen and told me, without softness, but with complete conviction, that I was allowed to protect myself from people who hurt me, even if those people shared my blood. That loving myself was not selfishness, it was survival. And James, from the doorway, said what he had been holding since the evening he saw 8 years of bank statements spread across his dining room table. $247,000. You gave them everything you had, and they didn't come to your wedding. You didn't fail them, Ava. They failed you. For the first time in weeks, the knot in my chest loosened enough to breathe. 8 months passed, and life began to bloom in ways I had been too exhausted and too guarded to fully allow before. Ember & Co. found its footing faster than my most optimistic projections. A local food blogger discovered us in March and wrote a piece describing the cast iron herb frittata as the kind of dish that makes you feel like someone built it specifically for you. And within 2 weeks, the weekend wait time stretched past 40 minutes, and I had more custom orders on the books than I could fill alone. I hired Zoe Park, a culinary school graduate with the precision of someone who treats every ingredient like an argument worth winning, and Marcus Webb, a single dad from Southeast Portland who turned out to be the most reliable person on my team and the first one through the door on every morning that required someone to be first. And the cafe became what I had always dreamed. Not just a place that served good food, but a place that felt like something, where regulars knew each other by name, and every afternoon we left a small basket of free snacks near the door for the kids who came in after school. Then, in April, I peed on a stick and stared at 2 pink lines until the certainty became completely real. Liam lifted me off my feet and spun me around, both of us and exactly the same time, the sound filling the apartment in a way nothing had filled it before. Susan at dinner when we told her, James made terrible jokes about teaching the baby to negotiate commercial leases, and they were so bad, and we had all of them anyway. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it actually felt like to be celebrated. Not for what I could contribute, simply for existing, and for the life I was carrying forward. Then Rachel called with news she delivered in careful pieces. My parents had invested heavily in a crypto yield platform that Brandon had introduced to them, a structure that promised substantial monthly returns and had the kind of professional-looking documentation that makes people who want to believe feel they have done their research. $80,000 gone in 3 months, run by Brandon's cousin, a Ponzi scheme from the beginning. The cousin vanished without trace. Brandon and Kayla were in the middle of a divorce, and my parents, without the monthly transfers that had functioned as their financial safety net for 8 years, were 3 months behind on their mortgage. I sank onto the bench outside the café and held the phone against my ear while the afternoon foot traffic on Division Street moved around me. And I should have felt the clean satisfaction of consequences arriving on schedule. But instead, I just felt tired, in the specific way of a person who has been right about something for a very long time and has received absolutely no comfort from being right. A text from Kayla, the first in 8 months. "Hey sis, can we talk? I know we haven't been close, but family is family, right? We should catch up." I typed back, "I'm busy with the cafe. What do you need?" The response came within seconds. "Nothing specific, just reconnecting. And, by the way, Mom mentioned the business was doing really well. Maybe I could help them figure out some financial stuff." There it was, the ask. Dressed in casual clothes, 8 months of silence, and not a single syllable of it had been about me. That weekend, I spread 8 years of paperwork across the kitchen table. Bank statements organized by year, the complete spreadsheet with every transfer and every emergency, and the total in bold at the bottom. And in the corner of the table, held down by a coffee mug, sat the ultrasound image from my 12-week appointment, our baby the size of a lime, with a heartbeat visible as a steady, bright flutter. I picked it up and held it beside the bank statements and said quietly to no one but myself, "This is what I am protecting now. This baby will never have to buy their grandmother's love. They will know from the very first day that they are enough exactly as they are." The 1-year anniversary of Ember & Co. fell on a Saturday in late October, and we decorated with autumn leaves and golden string lights, the display cases overflowing with seasonal work, pumpkin spice cinnamon rolls, maple pecan tarts, apple cider donuts glazed with brown sugar reduction that made the whole block smell like somewhere worth stopping. And a reporter from Portland Monthly had confirmed she would stop by for a feature on women-owned businesses. By noon, the cafe was full, a line extending out onto Division Street, and James and Susan had arrived with flowers and champagne, and Liam was moving through the crowd making everyone feel at home. And I was behind the counter, boxing a custom brunch basket when the bell above the door chimed. Diane walked in first, a dress I had never seen, purchased before their financial troubles by the look of it, deliberate and precise. The dress of someone who has arrived with a specific purpose. And Robert followed, with his hands in his pockets and the low anxiety of a man who knows a situation is going to go badly. And behind both of them came Kayla, thinner than I remembered, her makeup doing its careful best to conceal the dark circles beneath her eyes, none of them smiling. All 3 of them moving through my cafe with the energy of people who have come not to celebrate, but to collect. The room quieted the way it always does when conflict enters a space. Susan moved toward the pastry case, James set down his champagne. Liam appeared at my shoulder without being asked. Diane crossed directly to the counter, weaving between customers like they were furniture, and told me I had abandoned my own family, cut them off without warning, without any consideration for everything they had done for me. And her voice carried across the entire room with the projection of someone who intended to be heard by everyone in it. Kayla stepped up beside her. "She's right, Ava. You have all of this, and you can't even help your own mother. What kind of daughter does that?" I noticed Helen Caldwell, a retired nurse, a regular since the very first week, set her coffee down and go completely still across the room. I noticed the Portland Monthly reporter had quietly taken out her phone. "What kind of daughter?" I said, very quietly. I reached below the counter and set the folder on the surface between us. "You came here to ask for money. You came in front of all these people, hoping to shame me into writing a check. So let's do this properly." I spread the bank statements across the counter. 8 years of transfers from my account to yours, every month, $2,500. The $8,000 you told me was emergency medical bills, and the Facebook photographs from Scottsdale that you posted yourself 2 weeks later. $10,000 from my entire bakery savings fund for Kayla's wedding. And this page, June 15th, my wedding day. Notice what is absent. No gift, no card, no call, no parents. I said the number so the whole room could hear it. $247,500. And I could not buy your presents for one single afternoon. The number hung in the air like smoke. Diane's face went pale and still. Robert stared at the documents like a man waiting to be told none of it was real. Kayla's mouth opened and then closed. "So no, Mom, I'm not abandoning the family. The family abandoned me a long time ago. I just finally stopped pretending not to notice." Kayla said I was making it about money when it was about love. And I looked at her and said quietly, "When was the last time you called me just to talk? Not to ask for something, just to see how I was doing?" Total silence. I placed my hand on my stomach, barely showing it, holding everything that mattered now. I'm pregnant. And my child will never wonder whether their grandmother loves them, because they will have one who does. I looked at Susan across the room. She was already crying. Diane's voice cracked, not from grief, but from the humiliation of being exposed in public, in front of customers and a reporter, with the evidence spread out in front of everyone. "People are watching. You're embarrassing us." "No, Mom. You embarrassed yourself the day you chose a birthday party over your daughter's wedding. I'm just making the record clear." I gathered the bank statements back into the folder. My hands were not shaking. For the first time in my life, I felt completely, entirely solid, like a structure finally built on the right foundation with no borrowed weight underneath. "You are going to leave my café, and I am going to continue building my life with my husband, my family, and my baby." Robert stepped forward last, his voice very quiet. "Ava, I know we've made mistakes." I looked at him for a long moment, really looked. "Mistakes are forgetting a birthday, Dad. Choosing not to attend your daughter's wedding is a decision. And so is what I'm doing right now." Susan moved to stand beside me. James took his place on my other side. Liam's hand found mine. "This cafe is called Ember and Co. because my grandmother, the one you ignored until she had nothing left to give, told me I could build something warm in a world that runs cold. That is what I am doing. Without you." I nodded toward the door. "Please leave." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Helen Caldwell rose from her table and addressed Diane directly, in the clear and unhurried voice of a woman who has been waiting a long time to say exactly this. She told Diane that she had been coming to this cafe every Saturday for a full year, that I remembered her husband's name and asked about his treatments and saved his favorite dish even when it sold out early, and that the previous month, when she could not afford a birthday cake for her granddaughter, I had made one anyway and refused to accept a single dollar. She pointed at the folder on the counter. "That woman gave you $250,000, and you couldn't come to her wedding. You should be ashamed." A murmur moved through the cafe. Heads nodded. Someone near the back said under their breath, "Unbelievable." Diane grabbed Robert's arm and pulled him toward the door, and he went, without resistance, the way he had always gone. A man whose most consistent act across 32 years had been following someone else out of every room that required something from him. Kayla hesitated in the doorway and looked at me with something I had not seen on her face before. Something that looked almost like genuine confusion, as though she was encountering for the first time the concept that actions accumulate into consequences, and that no one was going to absorb them on her behalf this time. "Kayla," I said quietly, "goodbye." The bell above the door chimed. The door swung shut. 32 years of trying to earn my family's love ended in the time it takes a door to close. Susan wrapped her arms around me. Liam kissed my temple. Helen Caldwell returned to her coffee with the nod of someone who has done what needed doing and requires nothing further for it. If that moment resonates with you, if you have ever had to choose your own peace over someone else's expectations, comment the word respect below. I want to hear from you. And stay with me because we are almost at the end. The Portland Monthly reporter approached after they left and said she had come to write about women entrepreneurs, but that what she had witnessed was something else, and she asked whether I wanted her to leave it out of the piece. And the old part of me, the 32 years of staying small part, nearly said yes. But I said, "Write what you saw. This story isn't about revenge. It's about building something worth protecting." She wrote something down and ordered a box of cast iron cornbread to go. In the 3 months that followed, consequences completed their arc at a pace that required no help from me. My parents sold the house in December for less than market value, the pressure of their timeline leaving them no leverage, and moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Gresham, and Kayla, her marriage dissolved and her finances entirely gone, moved back in with them. The golden child, back in a twin bed in a 2-bedroom apartment, sharing walls with neighbors she had never met. The specific and inevitable destination of a life built entirely on the expectation that someone else would always absorb the cost. Diane sent a 3-page email engineered to reframe every event so that I remain the cause of all the suffering. No apology, no acknowledgement, just the same architecture of blame rebuilt on new ground. And I forwarded it to a family law attorney Liam recommended, not to pursue anything, simply to document, because by then, documentation had become second nature. That Christmas, Liam and I hosted dinner for 12. The Carters, Rachel, co-workers, friends who had grown into family, and we ate too much and stayed too late, and the house felt like the kind of home I had spent 32 years searching for, without being entirely sure what I was looking for. On a warm evening in late May, I stood in the kitchen of Ember & Co., holding my daughter, Lily Rose Carter, 7 weeks old, with her father's dark eyes and what I choose to believe is Grandma Rose's stubborn and certain chin. And from the very first moment I held her, I understood something I had been chasing my entire life through the wrong doors. This warmth, this small person who needed nothing from me except my presence, was what love actually felt like. Not earned, not purchased, not contingent on compliance or performance, simply given, freely, without conditions, the way it always should have been. Susan had been there for the birth, holding my hand through the hardest hours with the quiet steadiness of someone who is simply and entirely present, not performing comfort, just providing it. And James had paced the waiting room, running through grandpa jokes he had clearly been workshopping for months. And when Lily finally arrived, both of them cried harder than I did. The Portland Monthly feature had run in February and brought an avalanche of new customers and orders from across the country. Grandma Rose's cast iron cornbread and herb frittata mix shipping to New York, to Atlanta, to people who had heard the story and wanted something made by the hands that had built it. And everything I had ever wanted was right here, not handed to me, built, one early morning at a time. Then a letter arrived on a Tuesday, 1 year after the café confrontation. No return address. Robert Mitchell's cramped, careful cursive. The same script that had signed my childhood report cards without comment for 12 years. I almost threw it away without opening it. Something made me stop. He wrote that he knew he had no right to write, that Diane did not know about the letter, that he had been replaying my wedding day for an entire year, the moment she announced they were going to Kayla's party, the moment he should have said something, the moment he should have gotten in the car and simply driven to me, without permission, without waiting for someone to tell him it was the right thing to do. I was really just a coward, he wrote. He was not asking for money, not asking for anything at all. He just wanted me to know one thing. I'm proud of you. I always was, even when I never said it. You deserved better parents. I'm sorry you got us instead. I read that letter 3 times at the kitchen table before Lily woke up, and I cried, not from pain, but from grief for the relationship we had never had, and from the specific, complicated relief of finally being seen by someone who should have been looking the whole time. I did not write back. Not yet. Maybe someday. I tucked the letter in the desk drawer beside Lily's first ultrasound image and the deed to Ember & Company. 3 pieces of paper resting together like proof that endings can also be beginnings, that some losses are actually liberations, that home is not always where you came from, and sometimes it is simply where you decide to stay. I started therapy 4 months after the confrontation, and it helped to have someone help me untangle the architecture of what had been constructed around me over 32 years. To understand that my parents' inability to love me properly was their failure, not mine, that I had not caused it and could not have fixed it, and that the love I had never received from them was not evidence of anything lacking in me, but evidence of a capacity they had simply never developed. One afternoon, I wrote a letter I never intended to send, addressed to the 24-year-old version of me, the one who was about to wire $3,000 to people who would not say thank you. And I told her she was not obligated to purchase love that should be given freely, that the family she was searching for was not the one she had been born into. It was the one she was going to build, person by person, through the quiet and extraordinary work of simply showing up for the people who showed up for her. Start the cafe sooner, I wrote. Trust Liam earlier. Cry less. Save more. But most of all, forgive yourself for taking so long to understand what you deserved, because the journey mattered, and it is the painful parts of it that made you certain enough to protect what you have now. I kept that letter in the desk drawer, next to everything else that mattered. If you are someone's ATM right now, if you are always the one giving and never the one receiving, if you are standing somewhere wondering why the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who never show up, hear me. You are not broken. You are not selfish. You are not the problem. You are just finally beginning to see clearly what has always been there. Setting a boundary is not cruelty. It is survival. And the family you choose can be just as real as the family you were born into. Sometimes realer. Sometimes built on a foundation so much more solid that you cannot believe how long you spent standing on the other one. Thank you for staying with me through all of this, every minute of it. If this story touched something real in you, leave a comment and tell me about it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories like this one, and check the description for another video I think you will appreciate. Dawn comes after darkness, every single time.